I never expected to find myself in a hospital room at midnight, arguing with my stubborn father-in-law about whether his life was worth saving. But there I was, watching Harold Anderson's heart monitor beep erratically as he refused the surgery that could save his life. "It's too expensive," he wheezed, his face gray with pain. "I won't spend my retirement fund on medical bills. Just let nature take its course." I'm Andrea Fletcher-Anderson, Director of Operations at Sunset Years Living Communities, though Harold doesn't know that part. To him, I'm just his son's wife who married up and got lucky when Peter, his precious only child, chose me despite my working-class background. The irony of him refusing life-saving surgery while living in one of my company's most exclusive retirement communities wasn't lost on me. But then again, Harold had never bothered to read the fine print on his residency contract, the one that listed A. Fletcher-Anderson as the property owner. "Dad," Peter pleaded from beside me, "please be reasonable. The money doesn't matter." But to Harold, money always mattered. Even now, with his heart failing, he was more concerned about preserving his wealth than preserving his life. The same wealth he lorded over everyone for decades, using it as a weapon to control his family. "I've worked too hard," Harold insisted, "to throw it all away on hospital bills. Do you know how much I've saved? How carefully I've planned?" I did know, actually. As the owner of the retirement community where he lived, I had access to all his financial records. I knew about the millions he'd hoarded, the investments he'd hidden, and the trusts he'd set up to avoid taxes. I also knew he could easily afford the surgery with just the interest from his accounts. The doctor, Dr. Sarah Chen, pulled us aside in the hallway. "If we don't operate within the next 12 hours, the damage could be irreversible. The cost shouldn't be an issue. His insurance will cover most of it." "He doesn't care about that," Peter explained, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "Dad's always been," he trailed off, looking for a diplomatic word. "Obsessed with money," I finished for him. "To the point of letting it kill him, apparently." It hadn't always been this way. According to Peter, Harold used to be different before his wife. Peter's mother died 15 years ago. She'd been the generous one, the one who balanced Harold's tendency toward miserliness. After her death, Harold had retreated into himself, becoming increasingly fixated on preserving his wealth. When Peter and I married 5 years ago, Harold made his disapproval clear. Not because of who I was, but because of what I represented, someone who might one day have a claim to his precious money. He even tried to force Peter to make me sign a prenup, not knowing that my net worth was actually higher than his son's. "I need to make a call," I told Peter, stepping away from the hospital room. In my office, there was a file I'd been keeping for just such an occasion. It was time to use it. 20 minutes later, my assistant Megan arrived at the hospital carrying a thick folder. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, handing it over. "Once you reveal everything." "He's leaving us no choice," I replied. "Sometimes people need a wake-up call before it's too late." Back in Harold's room, his condition had deteriorated further. The monitors showed his heart struggling to maintain rhythm, each beat more irregular than the last. "I've made my decision," he announced as we entered. "I'm signing out AMA. I won't waste my money on this surgery." "Before you do that," I said calmly, "there are some documents you need to review." I opened the folder and pulled out his residency contract for Willow Creek Estates, the luxury retirement community he'd been living in for the past 3 years. The same community he'd bragged about getting into, not knowing I personally approved his application. "What does my housing contract have to do with anything?" he demanded. "Everything," I replied, turning to the ownership page. "You might want to look at who actually owns Willow Creek Estates." Harold squinted at the document, his eyes widening as he read my name. "This must be a mistake." "No mistake," I said, pulling out more papers. "I own not just Willow Creek, but the entire Sunset Years Living Communities Corporation. All 15 properties across New England, including the one where you've been living at a significantly reduced rate because you're my father-in-law." The heart monitor's beeping increased as Harold processed this information. Peter stepped forward, concerned, but I wasn't finished. "You've spent 5 years looking down on me, assuming I married Peter for money. The truth is, I've been subsidizing your luxury lifestyle out of respect for my husband. That ends now." Harold's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "You're lying. This is some kind of trick." I pulled out my phone and dialed the number. "Megan?" Please initiate Protocol 17 for Willow Creek Estates. Full audit of all resident accounts, starting with Harold Anderson's preferential rate agreement. You can't do this, Harold sputtered. I have a contract. Yes, you do. A contract that clearly states all preferential rates are subject to review if the resident demonstrates reckless disregard for their own health and safety. Refusing life-saving surgery for financial reasons certainly qualifies. Peter was watching this exchange with a mixture of amazement and concern. He knew I was successful in property management, but hadn't known the full extent of my business empire. We'd have to talk about that later. So here are your options, I continued, my voice firm but not unkind. Option 1, you get the surgery, use some of those millions you've been hoarding to save your own life, and continue living at Willow Creek with your current preferential rate. Option 2, you refuse the surgery, sign out AMA, and I immediately terminate your residency contract and initiate a full audit of your account. You wouldn't dare, Harold whispered, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Try me, I replied, pulling out one final document, a list of his hidden accounts that our financial team had compiled. By the way, the IRS might be very interested in some of these offshore arrangements. The room was silent except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Harold stared at me, then at Peter, then at the documents in his lap. For the first time in 5 years, I saw his carefully constructed facade of superiority crumble. Dr. Chen chose that moment to return. Mr. Anderson, we need your decision. The operating room is prepped and waiting. Harold looked at the contract in his hands, then at the heart monitor displaying his precarious condition. Finally, he looked at me, really looked at me, for perhaps the first time since we'd met. I'll have the surgery, he said quietly. As they prepared to take him to the operating room, he grabbed my hand. Why? He asked. Why help me all these years if you knew I was wrong about you? I thought about Peter, about the pain in his eyes every time his father's wealth obsession hurt someone. About the good man Harold must have been once, before grief and fear twisted him into someone who valued money over life itself. Because, I told him, sometimes people need a chance to remember what really matters. Let's hope it's not too late for you. As they wheeled him away, Peter turned to me with questions in his eyes. But before he could speak, Dr. Chen called for my attention. There were surgical consent forms to sign, insurance details to arrange. I had 12 hours of surgery ahead to figure out how to explain everything to my husband. And after that, assuming Harold survived, we had some serious family dynamics to reconstruct. Sometimes it takes a medical emergency to expose what's really sick in a family. The question was, could this surgery heal more than just Harold's heart? Part 2. The 12 hours of Harold's surgery gave me plenty of time to explain everything to Peter. We sat in the hospital's private waiting room, untouched coffee growing cold between us, as I laid out the full story of my business empire. So every time Dad bragged about his luxury retirement community, Peter shook his head, amazed. I was actually the one ensuring he had the best care possible, I finished. The reduced rate, the premium amenities, the special attention from staff. All because he was my father-in-law, though he never knew it. Why didn't you tell me the full extent of your success? I thought carefully before answering. At first, it was because I wanted to be sure you loved me for me, not my business. Then, after seeing how your father treated wealth and status, I wanted to protect what we had. Keep it separate from all that. Peter nodded slowly. Dad has that effect on people. Money becomes this toxic thing around him, poisoning everything it touches. It wasn't always like that, though, was it? I asked gently. Before your mom died? No, Peter's voice softened with memory. Dad used to be different. Generous, even. Mom was sick for a long time before she died, cancer. The medical bills were enormous, even with insurance. Dad spent everything he had trying to save her. When she died anyway, something broke in him. He started hoarding money like it could protect him from ever feeling that helpless again. The pieces started falling into place. Harold's obsession with preserving his wealth, his refusal to spend on medical care, his distrust of anyone he thought might want his money. He wasn't just a miser. He was a traumatized man whose grief had warped into financial paranoia. Dr. Chen found us just after dawn, looking tired but satisfied. The surgery was successful. We repaired the damage to his heart, and his prognosis is good. He'll need several weeks of recovery and cardiac rehabilitation. but he should make a full recovery. Thank you, I said, meaning it more than she could know. When can we see him? He's in recovery now. Give him about an hour. As we waited to see Harold, I made some calls to my office. Megan, hold off on Protocol 17. Instead, let's implement the family care package for Mr. Anderson's recovery. Yes, the full spectrum, private duty nurses, rehabilitation services, everything. Peter raised an eyebrow. More preferential treatment? No, I corrected him. This time we're doing it openly. It's time your father learned the difference between using money as a weapon and using it as a tool to help people. When we finally entered Harold's recovery room, he looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable without his usual armor of superiority. His eyes fluttered open as we approached. The surgery, he croaked. How much? Is covered by your insurance, I interrupted firmly, and the rest is taken care of. But we need to talk about what happens next. Over the next hour, as Harold drifted in and out of consciousness, I outlined the recovery plan. The private duty nurses from my company's healthcare division, the specialized cardiac rehabilitation program, the temporary modifications to his apartment at Willow Creek. I can't afford all that, he protested weakly. Actually, you can. I pulled out a financial statement, his real one, not the modified version he showed everyone. You have more than enough. But in this case, you don't have to. It's covered under your residency contract with Sunset Years Living Communities, my company. Harold was quiet for a long time, processing this information with a clarity that perhaps only facing death could bring. All these years, he finally said, I thought I was the successful one. The one with all the power. Money isn't power, I told him. It's a responsibility, something my father taught me before he died. He built his business from nothing, but he never let it become more important than people. Like I did, Harold whispered. Like you did, I agreed. But it's not too late to change that. The next few weeks were transformative. Harold approached his recovery with the same determination he'd once applied to accumulating wealth. But something else was healing besides his heart. It started small, him actually reading the reports I brought about his care, asking questions about the business I built, showing genuine interest instead of condescension. Then came the day he asked to see his full financial portfolio. I want to understand, he said, how to use it better. Not just keep it. We spent an afternoon going through his accounts. With his permission, I showed him how his money could be better invested, not just for return, but for impact. Programs that help seniors afford quality care. Medical research foundations. Community development projects. Your mother would have loved this, Peter said quietly, watching his father approve a significant donation to the hospital's cardiac care unit. The real breakthrough came during Harold's first week back at Willow Creek. I was there to check on his settling, and when one of the housekeeping staff, Maria, came to clean his apartment. Mrs. Fletcher-Anderson, she greeted me with a smile. How are you today? Harold's head snapped up. You know who she is? Of course, Maria looked confused. Mrs. Fletcher-Anderson visits all the properties regularly. She knows everyone by name. She helped my son get a scholarship for college last year through the company's education program. I watched Harold digest this information, that the daughter-in-law he dismissed as a gold digger was not only successful but genuinely respected by her employees. That evening, he asked to speak with me privately. I've been wrong, he said simply. About everything. About you. About what matters. He pulled out an old photo album. Would you like to hear about Peter's mother? About who we were before I forgot what was important. For the next few hours, Harold shared stories, not about money or status, but about love and family and the woman who had balanced him before grief threw him off course. With each story, I saw pieces of the man Peter had told me about, the father he'd lost when his mother died. Last week, we hosted a family dinner at Willow Creek. Harold insisted on inviting Maria and her son, along with several other staff members he'd come to know during his recovery. The man who once would only associate with his own kind now sat happily listening to stories in a mix of English and Spanish, genuinely interested in lives different from his own. You know what the strange thing is? He told me as the evening wound down. I felt poor when I was hoarding everything. Now, learning to share it, I feel richer than ever. Yesterday, I received a package from Harold, the detailed records of his offshore accounts. Help me fix this, the note read. It's time to do things right. Peter found me in my office, reviewing the documents. You know, he said, wrapping his arms around me, some people might have let him refuse that surgery, after how he treated you all these years. I thought about my own father, who taught me that true wealth isn't what you keep, but what you build and share. About Harold, who had lost his way in grief, but was finding his way back. About the family we were slowly becoming. Sometimes, I said, the best investment you can make is in giving people a chance to change. The heart monitor that had beeped so ominously that night in the hospital now sits in my office. A gift from Dr. Chen. A reminder, she'd said, that sometimes healing a heart takes more than just surgery. She was right. Harold's heart is stronger now, in more ways than one. And our family has learned that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or property holdings, but in the capacity to grow, to change, and to open our hearts to new possibilities. Even now, Harold still occasionally slips and makes a comment about money. But these days, it's more likely to be about how to use it to help others than how to keep it for himself. Baby steps, perhaps, but in the right direction. After all, some investments take time to show their true returns.